welcome back to our next edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. I am Dan Siegel, joined today by my co-hosts Matt Mlodzinski and Ben Anderson. Today we are discussing basketball coaches that are in need of a good season for one reason or another, whether it's because they are potentially on the hot seat, whether it's because they've just had a long amount of success and then have been struggling recently. We're going to talk about that. We each have a list of 5. So I'm going to throw it to Matt again first. Matt, who is number 5 on your list of coaches that need a good season in 2024 to 2025?
Yeah, I'm going to the ACC for this one, and that's Jim Larrañaga, a guy who has been around for quite some time. I'm glad you say that. Not a guy who has struggled in his past to get wins, but lately we haven't really seen it as much. I feel like we saw the peak of Miami literally 2 years ago when they made, a little bit of a surprise run in the NCAA tournament. They were definitely one of the top seeds, but make it pretty far in the NCAA tournament. Last year, though, Miami comes crashing down. And that's the concern to me. 10 straight losses to end the season for this Hurricanes team, a very talented Hurricanes team. And I feel like you got to look at Jim Larrañaga first and be like, he's a guy who's one of the oldest coaches in college basketball. I don't want to be ageist here, but you have to look at that and be like, okay, is that a sign of things to come in the future? You lose Omier to Baylor. Now, Miami did bring in Jalen Blackman, Lynn Kidd, Brandon Johnson, a good transfer from East Carolina. So the talent is there this year. But I think if you see that again, Miami needs to be proactive and not look at what Florida State has done with Leonard Hamilton. And I feel like they've kept him too long. We've seen Florida State kind of go from a top of the ACC team to the bottom tier. If Miami's smart, they won't let that happen. It can be tough when it's a coach who's been there for long, but I see this as a big year. Is Jim Larrañaga still fit to be the guy at Miami, or do we need to look in another direction?
I'm honestly really surprised you said that, only because I think Miami has had most of their success in the past couple years. And yes, they came crashing down to earth last year, but I'm not sure that Miami really absolutely needs it as much as a coach you just mentioned, Florida State's Leonard Hamilton. He's actually a guy I had on my list because I'm just shocked to see the sudden fall off of Florida State, especially because I view Hamilton in a similar light to Larrañaga, a coach that, yes, they're old in age, but they are modern in their style. And Florida State went from one of the top programs in the ACC to, over the past 3 years, 17-16, 10-10 in ACC play. Then 2 years ago, 9-23, 7-13 in ACC play, and then 17-14, 10-10 in ACC play. It's been a significant fall off. He has to be close to the end anyways, but I don't think if you're Leonard Hamilton, you want to go out this way. I don't really expect much of a bounce back from Florida State, though. Looking at their offseason outlook, I think we kind of could expect much of the same. There's a bit of roster turnover, and nobody that they've added so far has really struck me as somebody that could carry this team. So I think Leonard Hamilton needs a good season in order to sustain his career, but I don't necessarily think he's going to get one. So that's my number 5.
Yeah, and I'll just keep us in the ACC for our third one. It's 3 different coaches that we have going on here. I'm looking at Steve Forbes for Wake Forest. And now this is a little bit tough of a pick because he did have some personal matters that sort of ran through the season as well that I did want to mention beforehand. So it's more than just basketball here, but I do think eventually you just have to make the tournament. Now they have had some close calls, first 4 out, next 4 out, things like that over the last couple of years. But at some point, I think it needs to translate to some sort of postseason success. And it's reminded me a little bit of Jared Haas's tenure at Stanford in the sense that he had a lot of real talent there. And so did Steve Forbes, right? We had all these players that earned all these ACC honors, Alonzo Williams, Tyree Appleby, Hunter Salas, but it hasn't translated into the wins that you'd like to see. So I'm interested to see whether this team will be able to take that next step and make the tournament. They're going to be relying on a lot of people who don't necessarily have the production, like Juke Harris or Omar Blue, or even Davin Cosby, the transfer from Alabama. But I don't know. I think eventually you just have to make the tournament in this job.
So, yeah, for number 5, we each have ACC guys. I'll send it back to Matt for number 4 on your list.
Yeah, I promise I'm not staying in the ACC for this one. Interesting picks all around, though. It's funny how we all had ACC picks at number 5, but different coaches for different reasons. This one might be more of a popular pick, and it's Penny Hardaway at Memphis.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be real. 2 NCAA tournaments in 6 seasons, one of the top recruiters in the game. You should have more than that, especially – well, it's tough. You play in a conference that's really a 1 or a 2 bid league, but they should be getting in more often. You know what I'm saying? Like, they should have the resume in some of these years if they don't win the American to still be able to get themselves in position to get into the NCAA tournament. We haven't really seen that. You can look at even the COVID year. Okay, do you want to cancel that? Well, they only had 21 wins in that year anyways. So still, you keep it at 2 out of the 6 seasons he's been the coach. They've actually made the NCAA tournament. This year, they get Dane Danger from Illinois. So you got your big man. You get PJ Haggerty, a guy who could stay at Memphis for a few years from Tulsa. I mean, that guy was a stud as a freshman. Tyrese Hunter from Texas, Tyreek Smith as well from SMU. Those are 4 outstanding transfers. Like, it's the same thing all over again. Penny Hardaway has the talent. When are we going to see it actually work? When are we going to see it work for more than the first 15 games of the season or the last 15 games of the season? Can he coach this team throughout a full college basketball season and get them 25-plus wins to be in position to make the NCAA tournament? Because at this point, Penny Hardaway's been at Memphis for over half a decade, right? This is year 7 we're coming into. Enough is enough. Enough of the excuses. We need to see the wins in Memphis this season.
Yeah, I'd Penny Hardaway number 3. Same reasons you just laid out. So don't really need to add much. Yep, you talked about their 4 of their 6 portal acquisitions they got this offseason. The problem has never been roster capability, though. So can he get it done? We'll have to see. Ben, did you have Penny Hardaway on your list as well?
I did not actually. I didn't think of Memphis in this situation, but I will bring up my number 4 list or number 4 coach, and that is Kevin Willard of Maryland. I think that Maryland is too good of a job for him to have had these first 2 years that he had. And I think you can see in terms of fan frustration, this is a lot more intense than any of the coaches we've named before necessarily, except for probably Memphis, right? Of course. But I think that he has the roster this year where he doesn't really have a ton of excuses available to him. You get Julian Reese back. You get Jacoby Gillespie, who's a really good player from the portal. You get Derek Queen, a 5-star freshman. And you have Deshaun Harris-Smith coming back as well. I think there's a lot of talent there, and they can't really just finish near the bottom third of the Big Ten again. You can't miss a tournament again, especially coming off of Seton Hall. They really made a move to get you, the Terps did. So I'm really interested to see how he comes around in his 3rd year.
I take it by your reaction, Matt, you did not have him on your list? No. But I'll say my number 4 then, because you guys each said your 4. Like I said, I had Hardaway number 3, but I have Fran McCaffrey from Iowa as my number 4. Iowa basketball has kind of fallen off steadily, along with the Big Ten. I mean, I feel like it's kind of gone hand in hand, but they were a 2 seed in 2021, a 5 seed in 2022. They were an 8 seed in 2023, and last year they missed the tournament. So a little bit of a fall off. McCaffrey has been there for 14 years. He's built the program up, but I think he needs to prove in this 2024 to 2025 season that he can make the tournament, that he still has it. Now, Iowa has not made an offseason splash. They do return a quality front court of Peyton Sanford and Owen Freeman. The problem is, can this team defend? Because they were atrocious. They have never been a great defensive team really under McCaffrey, but it's gotten from okay, serviceable to atrocious to really bad under McCaffrey in the last couple of years. That's why I have at number 4, Fran McCaffrey. I think he needs to bounce back.
It's an interesting pick. I want to pose a question to both of you guys, though, before I go into my number 3. For Ben, for Kevin Willard, is it more about the fact that it was a bad year this past year because they made the NCAA tournament in year 1 in Maryland? Or do you think it's more about the fact that they have the talent this year? So it's kind of going into this season with, okay, it was a bad year last year. We don't want to hear excuses going into this year. You need to make it work.
I think it's a little bit of both. And then it just doesn't feel like momentum is there in College Park. It's nowhere. They don't really feel excited about much, especially last year. They were just really more frustrated than anything else. So when you combine that with the fact that it just kind of plummeted off last year, and you can make the argument that, is it Willard's players in year 1, or is this like really what Maryland is under Kevin Willard? And then moving forward, you do have the talent. I just think it's a situation where he needs to win pretty quickly.
Cool. And then, I mean, for Dan as well, because this is just a hot topic question for me. I mean, you look at Iowa, they've had some pretty good seasons over the past handful of years, but you could argue it did not have anything to do with Fran McCaffrey. It really had to do with the fact that they had one of the top players in college basketball in Luka Garza
True.
and in Murray. Like, would you say that maybe we wouldn't even have this conversation because Iowa got relevant and now they're non-relevant again?
I mean, yeah. I mean, obviously, it's not completely fair to say that because McCaffrey did get those guys on their roster, but it is true. And they don't have anybody like a Garza, like a Murray, either of the Murrays on their roster this coming year. So it's a little bit problematic. And that's what I'm going for. Like, I think he has something to prove at this point. Obviously, like I said, you can't attribute it to only the players and not the coach, but it's been a little bit of a downfall for Iowa. That's why I think they need to bounce back.
Yeah, and I honestly do agree with the pick as well. Both the picks. I didn't go in those directions for my number 3, though. I went with a Big East coach in Kyle Neptune heading into year 3. They go 500 in year 1. Then last year, they literally improved by 1 win. You cannot do that if you expect to keep your job for long. They cannot go 19-15 this year and keep getting better by 1 win. That's just not going to work. Villanova is a place much like Maryland where if it don't work out real quick, you're out the door, especially after replacing a coach like Jay Wright. And I know that Kyle Neptune had the stamp of approval. Jay Wright said that it was a good hire when it happened. And maybe he's expected to say that, but obviously he was an assistant at Villanova before. So I do take that at face value. I do think that Jay Wright believes that Kyle Neptune was the right person for the job, but we have not seen it so far. Everyone knows that Villanova has lost a handful of players this season. I don't think they've replaced it nearly with the same talent. I do think Max Shulga is a great piece, but he can't be the number 2 or number 3 guy on this team. He has to be like that 4th guy who can get hot in any given game. I just don't think that Villanova has the setup right now, and we haven't seen that Kyle Neptune can get this team above 20 wins without having the talent. He can't do it with the talent. How do we expect to do him this year without that talent? And to me, that's a big concern if you're Villanova. If I'm Villanova, I already have a short list of coaches who I want to go after the following year. Like, I don't know if there's rules against that. Maybe just brainstorming. I doubt you can actually tamper and, do things, too in depth. But I'm starting to have these conversations because through 2 years, it's been a disaster, quite honestly, in Philadelphia.
Yeah, I don't know if I would go that far. I do want to give him some sort of chance, right, in his 3rd year. But I did have him as my number 2 coach on my list, just because of the amount of talent. I was very high on Villanova coming into last year. I just thought combination of bringing in guys like TJ Bamba and Hakeem Hart, and then you pair it with Eric Dixon and Justin Moore, who's also returning. They struggled with a little bit of injuries, but overall that was a very talented team, and it was very disappointing to see them struggle so much, especially in Big East play. And I don't know. Villanova is a tough job. It's nearly impossible to come after Jay Wright and expect to maintain that level of success, of course, especially with how things have changed in the college basketball landscape as a whole. But yeah, at some point you need to show some proof of concept, I would say.
I had Kyle Neptune actually as my number 1 coach that needs a good season this coming year. Yeah, just one stat to throw at you because Villanova was arguably the best program in the country under Wright, and he didn't retire like most legends. They retire after falling off a little bit. They've lost it. Jay Wright retired in the peak of Villanova. Like, they made the Final Four in his last season, and over his final 16 seasons, they missed the tournament once. I'm excluding the COVID season. So they've missed it once in 16 years. They missed it twice in the last 2 years. So he definitely needs to prove something. I know Villanova was only a good program because of Wright, so it's not like it's naturally an easy place to win, but the expectations are high just because of what Wright has set up for them. So that's my number 1. You guys have said 4 out of my 5, but is anybody? I think Ben, your number 3 is still up, right?
Yeah, I have my number 3 out here, and this is a bit of an interesting case, but I have Steve Pikiell out of Rutgers as my number 3 coach. And this isn't so much to say that he's done a bad job at Rutgers. Of course, it's very hard to win there, and he's gone to the tournament twice already. It's that he cannot finish 300th, according to Torvik, in offensive efficiency with the amount of talent that he has coming in Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey, right? And at some point, if bringing in 2 5-stars is fantastic, but it also increases the pressure on your ability to succeed in that given season, right? So I'd be very interested to see what happens if he were to struggle, right? What if they miss the tournament? That's not a great barometer, of course, right, of talent, because we're seeing it with Anthony Edwards. He missed the tournament at Georgia, and now he's a star in the NBA. But it does say a little bit of something about the coach, and I'm just very worried that they may not live up to that expectation, given how dreadful their offense was last year. And that's just something I'm keeping a note of, at least.
Matt, go ahead. Do you have number 3 still available?
No, Kyle Neptune was my 3. Want me to go ahead to number 2?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Cool. I do have a Big Ten coach here. It's Mike Woodson. So, just a guy. I mean, honestly, like we know the case with Woodson, right? I mean, like Indiana had a pretty good year with Trace Jackson Davis, an NCAA tournament team. Honestly, like a really good program. It looked like Indiana's getting back last year. I think expected to not have as good of a season once you lose a guy like Trace Jackson Davis and Jalen Hood-Schifino, but still a regression. And I think with Indiana, it's kind of like that Kevin Willard case where, a proud program, they didn't win as many games as they would have liked last season, and they bring in a heck of a lot of talent. Umar Ballo, Kanon Carlisle, Luke Goody, Miles Rice. I mean, those 4 guys should be able to get Indiana a lot of wins this year, a couple NCAA tournament wins. It's not really a case of Mike Woodson being on the hot seat. It's more, if they don't start out good, then he will be on the hot seat. Like he is not on the hot seat headed into this season, maybe just a little bit, maybe, rumblings there. But if all of a sudden with this talented roster, Indiana is like 9-7 and just not winning basketball games, people are going to have that conversation. So that's my number 2.
Yeah, Mike Woodson was my number 1, actually, overall. It's just because it's Indiana, right? And that creates a different level of expectations than people we were talking about before at Florida State or Rutgers or Miami, right? This is Indiana. They were talking about him being fired last season for underperforming. So with a more talented team, the expectations go up in turn as well. And looking at the roster, one thing I find interesting is thank God they brought in Luke Goody, because before that, they still were going to have the same shooting issues that they had last year that frustrated so many Indiana fans, because this is, the birthplace of basketball or whatever you want to call it, right? And he needs to succeed at a job of this caliber. If they still want to call themselves a blue blood, I think that's a fair argument. But at some point, right, this is sort of the tagline for me, I guess, for all of these coaches. But at some point, you got to show proof of concept, and this is a talented enough team to make it to the second weekend. If they struggle and they're a 9 seed and they lose in the first round, I think people are going to have a lot of major questions for Woodson heading into next year.
So is that all 5 for you, Ben?
That was all 5 for me. Yeah, that was my last one.
Matt, you still have your number 1?
I do.
I still have my number 2 left. I'll say my number 2, and then you can let me know if it's the same or different than your number 1. I have Tony Bennett from Virginia. This just the fall off of Virginia basketball from that stretch from 2014 to 2019. They were the 1 seed 4 of those 6 years, including a national championship. One of those, they were the 2 seed and the 5 seed in the other 2 of those 6 years. Since then, they haven't won a tournament game, and they have not been a top 3 seed. And quite frankly, last year was pretty embarrassing, especially the way they went out in the first 4 to Colorado State. They failed to reach 50 points in several games. It's gone, whatever you want to attribute it to, NIL, portal, whatever. Virginia basketball has not nearly been what it used to be very, very recently. And honestly, I was very grim on them bouncing back this offseason until like 2 days ago, when after they lost out on top 50 point guard recruit Trent Perry, all of a sudden their offseason has gone from 0 to 100. They added 3 transfers, soon to be 4, just a lot of versatility and athleticism added to the roster, including Duke transfer TJ Power, who was a 5-star recruit last year. So they are set up to be better than last year, but Tony Bennett's not a guy that's going to be coaching as long as Jim Larrañaga or Leonard Hamilton is. I think that's a very, very agreed upon fact. So I think to increase his shelf life in the game, to prove that he still has a place at being an elite coach in college basketball, Tony Bennett needs a great season in 2024-25.
It's an interesting pick. It certainly is not the pick that I had at number one. You know what? Let's play a game. I've got a Big East coach at number one. Who do you guys think it is?
So Rick Pitino.
Ding, ding, ding.
Okay.
Rick Pitino, I think, needs to have a tournament season, a Sweet 16 season this year. I'm going to go off right now. So get ready. This is obviously a heavy topic for me right now. Davon Smith and Kadari Richmond is now the backcourt at St. John's. That is arguably one of the best backcourts in the country, let alone the Big East. We know what both of these guys can do. Davon Smith averaged 13 points, 6 rebounds, 7 assists at Utah. Kadari Richmond averaging 16, pretty much the same. 6 rebounds, 6 assists, you name it, whatever. And he does stuff on the defensive end. It is a tremendous backcourt for St. John's. But it is not just about the talent that is now in Queens. This is more about the fact that Rick Pitino, throughout last season, made excuse after St. John's started to fall apart. Remember, St. John's was actually looking like a pretty solid tournament team, and then they just started falling apart, losing games. What's he do? He literally mentions the fact that last year he had a short offseason, had to piece together this roster, and wasn't able to get the guys that he wanted on this team. You know what? Honestly, fair argument. He did not have a full offseason to do that. But guess what? This year he does. And it's Rick Pitino of all people. We know St. John's has the money. That's why they were able to get Kadari Richmond with that NIL money and get arguably the best player in the transfer portal. So this isn't just about the talent that he has at his dispense now. This is more about the fact that last season he kind of made the excuses. Hey, you know what? I didn't really want these guys. So we're losing right now, but you know what? We'll win next year. Well, guess what? Now we need to see that because it is next year. And Rick Pitino needs to make sure that those words don't just mean nothing. St. John's needs. I'm saying Sweet 16 this year. I'm putting it out there right now.
Yeah, and I hear everything you said. I think the only counter argument to why he shouldn't be number one or even on this list, because he wasn't on myself or Ben's list, is he's kind of the savior of St. John's, and that might go to your point, but that also might go away from your point in that St. John's is not a program that's used to winning. So yes, the expectations are there because it's Rick Pitino, because of all his antics, but also he it's not like he's going to be fired or anything. But then again, the fan base could turn on him pretty quickly, and it could become underwhelming for sure. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on this, Ben?
No, I think both sides. I can definitely picture both sides. It's interesting. I do have a question how long Rick Pitino is for college basketball. Obviously, he has the urge to come back, right? No one was forcing him to come back. He's older than the average coach, and he could have pretty easily retired away. But he loves the game, and I'll be interested to see how long he lasts. One final thing I did want to say though is I had a few like blue blood coaches that I was really considering putting on, or blue blood-ish coaches. Yeah. I was really considering putting on my list, mainly Jon Scheyer, Mick Cronin, and Tom Izzo. And I was sort of surprised none of those names came up just because of the added pressure. And I think what makes this list difficult is it's a sliding scale, right? Because the expectations at Rutgers are not the same as the expectations at Duke, and yet you can perform better and still have more pressure on you relatively, right, than the coach at I don't know, Iowa State or Oregon State or things like that. So did you guys ever consider maybe Jon Scheyer or Mick Cronin or Tom Izzo?
I heavily considered Scheyer. I considered Cronin a little bit. Yeah. I don't know. It's also, there's a new element of like, obviously like first year coaches, even second year coaches, maybe aside from Pitino, probably not likely to be on this list. But there's also like a lot of teams are moving conferences. The entire Pac-12 is moving conferences. So it's like, now you got to readjust your expectations there. And it's not a controlled experiment one year to the next. So there's a lot going on.
I mean, but I had Ed Cooley kind of as an honorable mention.
That's who I thought your Big East guy would be.
I was thinking about it. It's just like, for me, they only won 9 games last year, and I almost had Micah Shrewsbury for the same reason, but I was like, you know what, let's just let him get another year under the books. I know this both these were proud programs, but they both were coming from so little before they got there. So let's give it another year. I also had John Calipari on my list. He was almost going to be my number 5, just because, hey, change of scenery, everything like that. You got such a talented roster, but again, sort of the same thing. Like, is it worth putting that pressure? Is it worth creating that narrative before he even coaches a game at Arkansas?
Yeah, I had Calipari considered too, but agreed on this. That was the same reason I omitted him eventually. But yeah, that'll do it for today's edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. Be sure to follow us on all the socials. You can see scrolling along the bottom of the screen. Also, we have plenty of creative episodes we're going to continue to churn out. If you want to leave a suggestion in the comments, we'll be happy to listen to them. So be sure to do that if you have any ideas of creative episode topics for us. But once again, thanks everyone for watching and listening, and take care.